And panel. I already.
Okay. The planning board meeting of the 5th of August, 2026. We have a joint public hearing tonight. Development Committee.
Yes.
Yes. I'm going to start with roll call. Brian Delphin. Here. Jen Bluestein. Here. Alden Clark.
Here.
Charlie Palmisano. Here. Jamie Pennington.
Here.
Rick Painter. Moment not here. Jack McCare also not here at the moment. Matt Heffron.
Here. I'm Ben Harmon, Chair, Planning and Development Committee of the City Council. We're here for a joint public hearing with the Planning Board. It's August 5th at 7:06. I'm joined by Councilor Chalk and Councilor Nikitich giving us a quorum of the committee. And we're here to discuss primarily ordinance 226, but also we'll touch briefly on ordinance around data centers, which are both committee of the whole items.
So I want to give deference to Councilor Nick. Did you want to speak to the data centers? I'll make you want to.
Sure. Do you want me to continue the joint?
Oh, sure. Thank you. I'll be sure.
Make a motion to continue the joint. Or 224.
Yeah.
To September 6th.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll speak to it briefly and then Councilor Nick and I, we met with Councilor Delay, Jennifer Blushing, our zoning administrator, some folks from the water division. And we're also following with a bunch of others. Councilor Nick, may want to elaborate further, but just in general, we're going to be requesting with the planning board as well. There may be a desire for public comment. But we're interested in continuing this until September, so we have a couple of weeks to work on it further. I'll just say as planning director, I think our goal here was to make sure that if data centers are coming in, the primary concern was that it does not impact our water supply. So I think we're working together as a team to address that issue. And the goal that we wanted to balance there was not to grab or harm or prevent any types of other businesses or ancillary elements of things that are going on in the city. Folks obviously are going to have server rooms and things like that in their businesses. And we may have some smaller operations that are not necessarily needing to be regulated here, while still protecting in particular the water supply. So there are other concerns, or questions with a use like this. But we think it deserves a little bit more time for us to be able to work on that and bring back to the planning board and the city council further revised version of this. And so that's what the office would recommend. I believe talking with the councilors, both the sponsor and Nick on this, and a few others that we're working with. To the planning board, we just opening a hearing on this tonight, and there's any public comment. But generally speaking, we think it would be beneficial when we have that additional update for you.
No, just recognize Councilor Delay as the sponsor if you would like anything. No. Great.
Just want to try to address one thing before we move on to the 226. Is anyone here for the 9 Center Street project? The public here related to that. We have a request for continue. Yeah. So I could have a motion to continue to.
I think one of the 18th is the 18th.
So moved.
Roll we have to do this by roll call. So, Brian Falcon,
Yes.
Colin Clark,
Yes.
Jamie Pennington,
Yes.
Rick Painter. Raise your hand.
Yes.
Carol, Matt Heffron.
Yes.
We just continued until
It's the 19th,
9.
August 19th.
Okay, so discussion.
So I will give some background on this just to begin. Those who are not participating in our recent Ordinance 221 process, this will be some new information. For many who have participated in that process, you may see some overlap. I just want to start out by saying, which will be explained in the next slides, that this is not to preclude any of the learnings and potential next steps from Ordinance 221, which goes beyond what this is really a very narrow change. But I think that, we'll see how the discussion goes, but it could be somewhat complementary. So if you go to the next slide. So similar to a lot of that discussion, we do have problems and concerns that we're trying to address with this ordinance change, specifically oversized homes proposed that are out of context or incompatible with existing neighborhoods, oversized homes replacing smaller, more relatively affordable homes, and recent changes, this is the most important part, to the Zoning Act, MGL Chapter 40A, effectively means that now height and setbacks are the strongest dimensional tools for regulating the size, scale of homes in residential neighborhoods where other dimensional standards like lot coverage may no longer apply. Next slide. The specific language from the Zoning Act was inserted during the fiscal 27 budget process at the state level. One of those sections, section 43, reads, specifically that pre-existing non-conforming structures or residential uses that do not conform to zoning because of lot size or shape, frontage, lot coverage, or floor area ratio requirements may be now extended or altered as of right. If such extension or alteration complies with the current dimensional regulations regarding height, stories, and setbacks. So we have other tools for discretionary review that are now being discounted or potentially eliminated. And we have 3 sets of tools that will be the remaining ones that will be enforceable based on this law. Next slide. So the goals, what we don't want is houses that are 2 to 3 times the square footage of existing homes in their neighborhoods, houses that tower over smaller neighbors, changing the character of neighborhoods, further loss of control over size, scale, massing of residential homes in these neighborhoods. What we do want is a healthy range of home sizes, including smaller homes, to match residents' needs, including entry-level options. We want to maintain local control over size, scale, and massing of residential homes in these neighborhoods. And this does not, as I said earlier, purport to address all of the concerns or considerations relative to size, scale of homes in these neighborhoods, or the other regulatory tools that may help preserve or create a sufficient stock of smaller, more affordable homes in Newburyport. And we'll continue that discussion in the future as it relates to additional steps. Next slide. So this proposed amendment, as I said, is relatively narrow. It will look a little more complicated when you see some of the maps, but it's really defining a new R2A district, which is now would be comprised of all of the current R2 located outside of the DCOT. And it would reduce the default height allowance in that new subdistrict from 35 feet, which it is currently, to 25 feet. Height in Newburyport is measured to the mean average roof height, not the peak ridge line. So with this in mind, the present 35-foot allowance could result in even taller structures, like 45-foot ridge height, located in what have traditionally been smaller scale residential neighborhoods, consisting largely of 1- and 2-story homes. So we're going to go through some examples just to give a sense, but first the zoning map. This gives you a sense of the existing R2, where there's some overlap with the DCOD. The next map shows this hard outlined area is what would become the R2A. with the decod unchanged at 35 feet. And this is exactly what we will be changing on the next slide. New district R2A, and a height change, or height imposed of 25-foot limit. So just to give you a sense of what we're talking about in the built environment, this is just a streetscape view to give you a sense of what it looks like on this example at 26 Beacon Ave. You can see that these are largely single-story, two-story homes that fit nicely within the neighborhood character. This is to a 26 Beacon Ave as it is existing. Next slide shows 26 Beacon Ave as it was initially proposed at a height of 33 feet. After ZBA review, I believe it was ZBA, they came to a compromise proposal at 24 feet, which is still showing, as you can see, nice two-story home, lots of room, and something that could be, a little bit more in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. The next example is Murphy Ave. Here it's a little harder to see. You've got, single-family home or single-story homes on either side, sort of a ranch style looks like. And on the next slide, you can see an example of one home, 5 Murphy Ave. On the next slide, you can see what was approved at this location, which was a 6C development where we created 2 smaller single-family homes on one lot. The next example, Plant Street, you can see houses, 2-story homes, decent sized. At the example on 10 Plant Street, as of right, house at 25 feet would fit nicely within that character at 2 stories. Roosevelt Place, again, some ranch and cape style homes at primarily single 1-story homes. And on the next slide, you see a proposal that would now be approved as of right for that same neighborhood at 32 feet. And I think it's 2.5 stories. So this would be allowed. 3.5 stories. So the next slide at Erie Ave, again, ranch style post-war homes. An initial proposal at 20 Erie Ave, next slide. At 28.5 feet would have been what we would consider something that would be out of keeping with the character of that neighborhood. On the next slide, after review with the ZBA, that came down to 24 feet. Next example, also Erie Ave, same streetscape look and feel. The approved plan for that on 21 Erie Ave, 22.5 feet is, again, very reasonable increase in size for this home. So the reason to go through some of those examples, I think we have one more. In the benefits of 226 would allow the DBA and other special permit granting authorities to reasonably apply height restriction that would allow for someone to still achieve an upgrade and upper story on their home without opening the floodgates to something that could be, above 35 feet. So here we have 2 examples moving left to right, 26 Beacon Ave as it was existing at 33 feet, and then where it landed at 24.5 feet, which we think is a decent compromise. 20 Erie Ave, again, same thing, as it is existing, posed at 28.5 feet, and then as it was approved at 24 feet. So those are the slides and the explanation. Happy to answer any questions or open it up if councilors would like to add anything, or Director Ford and Administrator Motion.
No, Councilor Hoffman, I think straightforward. I know there's a policy debate for anything like this. I do think it makes sense to have a reduction from 35 feet in nature. I'm not wedded to a specific number. I know it's been talked about 25 or 27.5 or something like that. I defer, Jennifer has looked at a lot of our zoning administrator has looked at a lot of our plans, give deference to those folks and our architects and whatnot and checked it already. I do think the 25 is sort of within that reasonable scale, to fit in the neighborhoods, but I do think the 35 feet is, especially given that we measured the mean, would be too sort of excessive in the books today. So that I would recommend a reduction in some way. It seems like a reasonable proposal.
I will add just for folks who may not have participated fully in the workshops that we conducted around ordinance 221, and I think most of the counselors in the room, all of us participated fully, and I think there was broad consensus around this height. To Director Ford's point, there was some conversation around 27 and a half. We felt like 25 time and again was coming up as something that was allowing for appropriate, upper story increases on these homes without needing to go all the way to 27 and a half. So that's why we proposed to fix this.
So I do, I think this is a good ordinance. I think it's something that I think we need to do and for future dimensional changes. I would like to, I already have an amendment. Usual to do that at the bottom, but at the start of the planning board.
Incorporate that.
So I'm making a motion to amend 226 so that in the standing R2, the decod, the roof height, mean roof height is reduced to 27. And this is for the same reasons that we're concerned about doing this. Lowering roof heights in a new R2A. Because of what the state has done, there will be no, if you want to build up to 35 feet, which is, we actually have very few 1 or 2 family homes, if any. I'm actually trying to look into that in the decod. If you look at Fruit Street, which is mostly federal style homes, and those are some of our tallest residential buildings in the decod, none of them have an absolute height higher than 32 feet. So 35 feet in mean height is actually, even for historic districts with grand homes, excessive. But what the state has done is it said, if you want to increase the height of an existing house, build a new house in the decod, which is difficult. We don't have that empty lots. But we do have houses that people like to add on to vertically because they can't add on to them. And it has resulted in some pretty horrible looking things. I can provide examples. And it is, they still come before the Historical Commission and the ZBA. This would help, this would just help prevent it. There will be, from now on, the state has said, if you want to raise the height of a house, there will be, it's by right, there will be no notification to abutters, there will be no CDA review or findings about whether or not that height increase is substantially more detrimental. So if we lower the height, 27 and a half, we will capture most cases that go beyond that. And if we lower it to 27 and a half feet, if someone wants to go above that, it will still require special CBA. So it's a good idea to be caught as well from excessive.
Yes, okay, thank you. For the minute. It's okay. Yes, since we're enjoying public hearing, we can have discussion with them.
Love that comment. One of the things that we will be talking about later this evening, some response to all of this related to mostly the demolition. There is the older historic neighborhoods in the city. It's interesting that there really is a difference in the housing type between those neighborhoods that illustrated, and the difference between 25 feet which allows a second story to be basically tucked under the roof shape with dormers. And 27.5 feet is in the older neighborhoods, there are a lot of houses with a full 2-story block before you get to the roof. And if you do the math on all of those floor heights, you can comfortably get to 27. So I would wholeheartedly support that. I think there are other things we need to talk about. We need to talk about in what would become the R2A neighborhood, but I think both of those changes.
I'd like to take a bit of a contrarian view. I don't think that it's necessarily on its face not the right thing to do, but there are a couple, I think, additional circumstances we should discuss that are very important. One is that, just to be clear, and I think you said it, but that's when lots are non-conforming. This ability to expand is when lots are non-conforming. So there's another correction to that, which is to reduce lot size and frontage, thereby making more lots conforming. And then the same controls would apply. That's one possibility. Another thing about heights is we think about these a lot of times flat sites. There are flat sites, but there are also slope sites. So I don't necessarily know. I think Bob's right. I think some of the numbers we throw around generally work, but we also have a lot of properties on a hill, on a slope, and that doesn't always work. And I've seen some of those instances. So I don't think it's necessarily as simple as we've described it, even though I think conceptually it's probably still a good idea. And then the last thing I would say, a third thing really, is that I really appreciated in where the response going to the workshops is going in terms of a combination of carrots and sticks. I think that this is primarily just a stick, and the idea of where things were going, which I think is great, really fantastic, of thinking about this a little more comprehensively, of carrots and sticks for single family versus multifamily housing. I know that we're trying to do this quickly because of in response to this legislation, and I respect that, but I do think it's a little short-sighted to just take things so piecemeal. So I was prepared to support it related to the R2A, but expanding it to R2, I think goes too far for me. I don't think I could really support that without further information, study, and perhaps integration with some of the things that have been talked about. And I know they're in the works, and many of them probably will happen, but it'd be very difficult for me tonight to support the amendment.
I just want to reiterate something that you acknowledged, but I think is worth repeating. We are proud of the work that we did on 221, and I'm grateful to my colleagues for all of their time and effort that went into that. If we didn't have the state imposing something which went into effect July 1st, so we are currently exposed to a by right 35-foot structure in the R2A as we have it described today. And so we are taking this action piecemeal because we're being forced to. But I think it does not, as I said at the beginning, I fully expect further effort to go into helping to address all of the different diverse housing needs that we have. And that can include further study. I will respect your feelings on the decod portion, but just felt saying that because we feel we're being pushed into this.
I just want to make one other point relative to R2A. Again, agree completely with the reduction in height. I think the other thing that needs to be acknowledged sooner rather than later is I think there's still a potential for houses to be out of scale with their neighbors if the lot size and the setbacks remain 10,000 square foot lot with the setbacks leaves a buildable footprint way out of scale. So I understand the first step, I understand the reason. There's some very important steps that we can't say.
I mean, could I speak just to clarify? So thank you. I mean, this is all out of respect because I really like generally the direction that always is going. I think I could get behind the amendment with an adjustment to lot size because that would kind of work together. I don't know what the number is because I didn't come prepared tonight to think about what that number would be, but I could see some combination of those two things getting closer That makes sense for me.
Do you want to respond?
Yes, so, one thing that I think, should be made clear is when 221 was being discussed, we got a lot of ZBA, including ZBA input on the VCA, even though 221 also did not include. And the ZBA is the body that has to deal with special permits in the DCOD and outside of the DCOD that try to sort of supersize a building upward. And the 27 and a half in the DCOD, based on cases they've had before, was actually a ZBA, the ZBA vice chair. So, because they're the ones who look at the applications coming in and understand the problems they've had, trying to deal with them, where something is going on that will be more intimate, but it meets 35-foot height requirement. They would prefer to have a little bit more room for ZBA discretion, which is still possible. You can still get a special permit. Go beyond the
Correct. So I want to defer in part to our zoning administrator who's here with us today. I did want to note, and it may be a policy little question as well with either the amendment or any future discussion on this, but whether or not you wanted to codify specifically the ordinance that going above that number would be by special permit versus being by variance, dimensional variance. So I just wanted to clarify that because when you mentioned it earlier and as you mentioned it just now, it sounded like perhaps you wanted to allow or include a provision that would allow an increase by discretionary special permit. I mentioned that I realized and I think you know, the variance at the state level has changed in its nature, but just wanted to make that distinction because normally, I guess I will say at least for myself, I still think that the prior case law that applied to variances to some degree will still, utilized, applied in reference here, where variances are perhaps treated as more, limited in granting versus special permits are more commonly seen. So I asked the question only because to your suggestion that it be by special permit, I might need to codify that as opposed to assuming it. Otherwise, it might be just by variance under the state laws. Start off with.
Okay, thank you, because in one meeting I had actually asked about that, you said it's by special permit, but if it's by variance, it can be done by variance. I prefer variances, I'm used to the variance we have now. I understand what the state is trying to do with the variances, but yet, as it may, it's still steep, but.
So you prefer to be by, okay.
By variance, but I also want to, there's people in the room who live in the DCOD and own a beautiful federal staff home. Which probably would not be a problem even with this. Everything that's built right now. And there's a catastrophe. There are situations where reconstruction is important. And different, again, I don't know what the state is doing to anything, but my understanding is that if you need to reconstruct a building that was certain, you have 3 years to do it. And the zoning administrator.
So I want to further clarify this conversation, and I think that there's another category that perhaps is where the confusion is coming in. A pre-existing non-conforming home, so a home that may already be 30 feet tall. If we were to change the zoning, we the city, to change the zoning and make it 27 and a half, it's it's pre-existing non-conforming or grandfathered in. It could be extended through the special permit for nonconformities process, which is different than if you were to build a new home and want to go taller than the requirement. So I think that's part of the confusion. Most of the DCOD is built out, and therefore most of the DCOD would be expanded, if it were to be expanded, through the special permit for nonconformities process. A variance would only be if you had an existing home that was 20 feet tall and you wanted to build that out. to be 30 feet tall that exceeded this 27.5. So I think that there, to your concern and maybe some of the others in the room, there are avenues for expansions that don't conform to the height limitation if we were to lower it. But they vary a little bit depending on the particulars of the circumstance. If I can, one more thing, there was a by right home in, I don't know if it's in the DCOD or just outside of the DCOD, but it's a very large home that caused a lot of neighborhood concern based on the scale of it. And it's 28 feet tall. I think if anybody went and saw that and had concern that we couldn't build large enough homes to be contextual with the DCOD, if anyone looks at that house, it's not a secret, we've talked about it before with the builder. This is on Lincoln Ave. It's only 28 feet tall based on how we measure things. So I guess to your concern, Jamie, I do think that some of the architects who participated in these workshops looked at, does 27.5 still get you a contextually appropriate home? And also remember that we allow for elements to project taller than that. You know, so we could still get turrets and things like that that exceed that height. So it's not without, I don't believe it's just a sort of stab in the dark. It was based on some analysis of what the built environment is in the DCOD.
Yeah, if I could just clarify, since I appear to be the contrarian a little bit. Yeah, just to clarify, just because I think it's important to be precise, you can't create a new nonconformity. So if you had so you can get an expansion as long as you don't create a new nonconformity. So that would still put you in the variance realm.
It would.
Just a little precision there. First of all, and also I don't disagree with the general height. I really don't. It's not that I think it should be 35 or higher. It probably should be it should definitely be a lower number. It's just I kind of have a little bit of allergic reaction to the piecemeal approach. That's all. And I do think that the bigger issue that I want to make sure is said is that it's the abundance of non-conforming lots that drive this. And our zoning is just broken when it comes to the lots being in conformity to what we actually do. And I just don't want to lose sight of that. And I know you're not. I'm actually very impressed with Councilor Delay's approach to that in our last meeting. I was wowed by it, actually. So I know it's going in that direction. I just think it's important to have that comprehensive view.
And I agree with you. I especially, when we're talking, as you put it, carrots and sticks, and what we were, sort of trying to do a more holistic approach. I think that also was also an approach built very strongly on good faith with everybody who came to the workshop. And I'm really struggling with saying, thank you so much. We heard 25 feet and then we're, and to that. And I know why, but I am concerned, for lack of a better word, at the optics of that. But also to your point, the lot size really does matter here as a balancing force and to bring these things in conformity, because then we can, apply all of the things that we want to apply. So I'm really torn because I understand sort of the emergency nature and but I don't know. It's hard to legislate zoning as an emergency because there are so many moving parts and pieces. It doesn't feel like it's not a strong process, and that's frustrating.
Can I just add, because it dovetails with that comment and what you're saying, Jamie, which could be contrary. We're having a good discussion as you're bringing that up. The state's intention with everything that they're doing, which is the basket of random things, is to address the housing crisis. I just have to say, I recognize that they are doing this with that in mind. I also have to say that it is so evident that legislators in Beacon Hill should not create zoning for local communities for this reason. And we've expressed that. We've done every single thing that we can to try to even getting passed. And we will continue to work on, as Councilor Nikodic said, updating our zoning in response to ensure that we're trying to create a situation where people can build housing and neighbors can get along in a way that, can be in balance. So I just felt like it's worth saying. We're mad at them for the way that it went down, but they're doing it because they're trying to address it.
Question, Andy, maybe you can help. So if we're thinking about outside of the DCOD, which now we haven't talked about very much, that was sort of the original thing. Outside of the DCOD, we actually do have a lot of evidence and discussion from the workshops, and I have some questions on the map on that. But within the DCOD, 27.5 feet, are we net reducing, creating, or breaking even on nonconformities by changing that height? Do we have a sense?
I don't know, I haven't looked at enough of the properties. I think generally speaking, that is not a number that I'll say it again, it's not like myself. I don't know, unfortunately, I can't give you a spectrum of that, unfortunately, sorry. But I don't have a major concern about it myself in general, having looked at sort of the entirety and constantly sort of seeing permitting in those neighborhoods. It doesn't concern me, as much. It would perhaps concern me the 25 feet, maybe sort of getting over too low, but that
Within the DCOD.
within the DCOD, I can see sort of within reason the 27.5 and recognizing the greater sensitivity that neighborhood is denser. Folks are closer together and having some sort of discretionary review for those things that are expansions in the context of the state changes. Totally understandable in spectrum. It is a policy level like anything else. Anything else in this dimensionals, private property rights, meeting, a community vision of what everything works, when everything works together cohesively. So those numbers don't really concern me per se, but folks like Jennifer have been looking at plans, a lot, and the architects, when we start with this tonight, you might have some thoughts on that, but the number doesn't concern me per se.
Is it unknowable to say, are we creating or reducing nonconformities with that? Can we ballpark it?
We could study a subject neighborhood, but I don't know that I could quickly come up with that. We could look at it. What I will say is that because the homes in the DCOD are protected in a different manner from sort of, and it is so largely built out. What we're really talking about in the DCOD, if that's what we're talking about, are expansions that are generally either above the existing, or behind the existing, and in neither case is 35 feet appropriate. And if you were talking about a historic home, making it taller is probably not the goal, that was intended by the DCOD district. And nor would an expansion that's taller behind be a preferred solution. The bigger issue in the room in the DCOD is the fact that there are so many other nonconformities, never mind that. So
that's the same reason I'm having difficulty in that project, because when we say, is it conforming or non-conforming, will this change make it more conforming? It might address one dimensional, criteria, but the other one still might be.
If your question is in an effort to make lots conforming so that we can apply all our dimensional controls, a lot has to meet all of the dimensional controls except setbacks and height in order to be considered conforming. So if a lot, we make it, this is a lot of information, but we want to make, if we think it's a good idea, as some have suggested, to make the lots smaller so that they're conforming lots to frontage and area. But that property occupies 45% of its lot, meaning the house does. It's already still non-conforming, regardless of whether the lot size and frontage meet the requirements. And so we're still subject to the state's new statute that says you can add to that non-conforming lot. So
Two hands, Brian, and then.
Yeah, so I guess, as I listen to the conversation, I know the last time we were together, we knew we would be at this point where the planning board has to do its work, and it's been doing its work, and that 27.5 number, interestingly, has been making the rounds. But, to Jamie's point, I think we should use the same process on a smaller scale of how we validated the 25. Those examples make it clear as to why we're making the decision. So I think we can pretty quickly, and we knew we were going to have this meeting and then another meeting to finalize. Maybe in that time, we can sort out all the things Jennifer has in her mind, right? Those are valid things. And then how we pick up height. And if we have 5 examples like the ones Bob brought up to the last, and we'll add a slope one, and then we'll say, okay, based on these 3 examples, it's a number, and it may very well be that exact number, but at least as a group, we'll know why.
So I think that what Jennifer's been pointing out is very good reason for things to be done. And the DCOG is extremely sensitive in terms of what we do to the dimensional. I don't know if you remember the first meeting, the first joint planning board hearing for 221, which was quite complex. It filled the room. People, it is much easier to explain to people who are actually going to be affected by it what it practically means to them, to give them examples. The minute you start adjusting lot sizes, everything changes. And the DCOG is very, very sensitive. People on the property in the DCOG are very sensitive to info. They don't want it. So you'll find that there's a political will on the council to not do things that might start infill again in historic neighborhoods. I'm just saying that there is actually a good reason from public office and from actually being able to get things done to take them.
Just for the record, we also had 2 separate accompanying, one zoning change and one ordinance change at the same time in 2021. There was a lot of response to several things at that time, but I take your point. Go ahead.
No, I will say though, your point is taken that it might be easier and it is politically easier, but it's also politically easier to pass the sticks than the carrots. And if you're not balancing out, because it's easier to, generally speaking, it's easier to, more voices come out many times against development, right? You see that all the time at every one of these meetings. And so if you are passing the sticks first because they're easy and then the political will dissipates to pass the carrots, that is in no small part why we are in the housing crisis we are in right now. So I think it's very, very worthwhile to make sure that we are balancing this approach. And it does, you know, I'm trying not to bring up 221 a lot, but it's clearly in my head as a co-sponsor. But you know, there's a fear, I will not put words in my co-sponsor's mouth, but that we do this and then it feels like we're done and the carrots never get done. So I really want to make sure that we are taking a balanced approach on this. And I think that, you know, and again, all the people who participate, all the architects and builders who sat down with us, I think really believed in us when we said we were taking a holistic approach. And I don't want to break that promise because this happens to be an easier thing to do right now.
Yeah.
So I just want everyone to remember that 221 ultimately did not touch the DCOG, they left that alone. I'd also like people to remember that Newburyport, the second most densely built out city or town in Essex County, only Lawrence more densely built. And that density comes from the DCOG. So we're about part of Newburyport that supports a lot. Is it expensive housing? Yes, it is, but that's not, you know, that's not going to be resolved very soon. So, you know, just the approach we're taking to the DCOG is to be sensitive to it as extremely dense and extremely historic part of the city. So for me, just getting the height, which often comes up as a problem, roof height changes, in the DCOG, to make sure that we're still getting CBA review. I'm happy with that. I think most people in the DCOG will be happy with that. And then I really would like to get them to types of more holistic changes for the two exit.
Okay, I'm gonna,
One
counselors are dominating.
quick thing I want to say. In the detail. It's based on the experience of this board over the last year, I would say, reviewing the project. You know, econ has average lot sizes probably 4 to 5. Our current zoning requires 10,000. The average frontage is 40 to 50 feet. Our zoning requires 90 feet. We have had several projects in front of this board. There's absolutely nothing we can do other than to allow completely, in my opinion, inappropriate solutions. Those were the rules offer rightfully playing by. And I hear what you're saying, but the decon neighborhoods are now experiencing accessory dwelling units. There are a limited number of opportunities still for infill, but there's still a few out there. I think that we have to recognize what we have in our current zoning is completely inconsistent with the reality. That we do have to do stuff. We can discuss what it is, but we have had a very hard time as a board in the last year because of those rules, having to approve something that I don't think any of us felt great about.
Yeah, I remember you saying that the last time we all met. I am interested in knowing in what those projects were, so if you know what the addresses were, you look at it, and why they were.
A lot of them were courts and living projects and
In the DCOG.
It was a difficult one. I'm not to the team.
Oh, God.
I'll think about the room.
Okay.
The only comment is something to the, when you do what you do, and it's always true. But I look at it as, there's a mismatch between what our ordinances say and the reality. So, and that just creates a conflict. If everything's, 30 or 4,300 square feet was, I think, the average, and you require 10, that mismatch isn't a carrot or a stick. It's just updating. We did in the business zone, we changed the zoning because there were things in there that are there. And we didn't allow them, but they were there. So I would almost put it in another category of, while we're doing the stick, I guess, what we're looking at now, we could add at least those items that are housekeeping, get it to the current day, not what it was, 30 years ago. And I think lot size falls naturally, that setback falls naturally. Where I live, it's 5-foot setback. The only thing, the difference is you got to walk down the stairs to get onto the sidewalk. But if someone came, they would have to have 25. Right, they would have to have 10,000. So that's my thought.
I don't disagree with you, and this has been helpful to think about how we can, absorb this feedback in our next steps and direction timeline. I do want to point out, just in case people are not familiar, another provision that accompanies this provision essentially allows any application that comes in between July 1st and us passing zoning, which will take back to the council 2 times to, do twice. Any application is grandfathered into the current zoning. So there's no retroactive application of any height change. I brought this out for discussion. I did not bring it up so that we could pass it in one night, but and so this has been very helpful. I just want to defer to the chair and perhaps take public comment.
Can I offer one clarification to something that was said? Just as you consider all of it, but specifically the ordinance before you being height, there was a concern with hills and what do we do with unusual topography? That is what the variance is for. You shouldn't, at least from my perspective, and the seat I sit in, don't design zoning for the unusual situation. As you're talking about here, design zoning for the most typical, and then the variance can be used for the unusual situation, regardless of what the current language says. I really do think the Hill doesn't need to be worried about. Look at your typical neighborhood and figure out what's right for that. And that's the policy that you have to work, decide.
Let's open it up for public comment. If anyone has a comment, please come forward. We'll close public comment.
We haven't spent very much time talking about R2A outside of the DCOD, and I would like to, if we could spend a little time on that. We have very thoroughly vetted through the workshop process, height for, thank you for this map. So for the section west of Atkinson Common, the section immediately east of Atkinson Common, and the snake around the Bresnahan and into the hospital. That's was the main focus of the workshops, and we had achieved consensus that 25 was absolutely great there. But we spent less time talking about these other areas, and I would like to, sort of walk through some of those areas right now. So I broke it down into the things that I thought we hadn't really focused on. So one of those is like Russell Terrace and Oleo Woods. Russell Terraces, those are very short. Like that definitely makes sense. But Oleo Woods, they're bigger. I don't think they're that much higher than 25 feet, but I don't know. But we hadn't really talked about this. I know that Councilor Medina Smith was giving it some thought about, in relationship to 221 as well. So I think that she may have some questions and input there. I don't know if anybody has thoughts about that particular bit, but I was also today spent. Andy, I'm not sure if you could zoom in on the map, like around Toppins and Wright's Court. I just couldn't tell from this. Is Wright's Court included? Is it half? Where does it fall? Is it inside the DCOD? Is it outside? Is it?
Yeah, sorry, one actually is a better way. So right in here, looking at Wright's Court, that's our boundary right now, DCOD. So if we're using that, that's also.
It's okay.
They're mostly, we tend to follow law line, but
So, I mean, generally speaking, the general development, 25 feet makes sense, but there are some of these outliers, potentially Oleo Woods, Wright's Court, Johnson's little, I know that we're not gonna like spot zone it and get it perfectly, and I think in general, the pattern makes sense, but I am a little, I know that, when we were workshopping this, and we had said, wards 1, 2, and 3 are kind of off the table here. I don't know that all those councilors in those neighborhoods then have fully maybe given its thought. So I just, I guess it's just me perhaps, from my point of view, general development makes sense, 25 feet makes sense. But right in the areas that councilors and neighbors are concerned about, I did want to ask you about like the Cherry Street pop out. Because I remember you had done research on it, but I couldn't remember if it was the height or the lot size that had given you pause.
It was the lot.
The lot size. Okay.
That based on 221, it would have lot sizes would have allowed for much bigger.
Because without those things, okay, so what's the number?
But that is a neighborhood of pretty much 1 and 2
Yeah.
story homes. There's one big exception, I think, we're building that. set- So.
Yeah.
It can stay there, but no.
And Andy, are there little bits in, like,
These slivers
yeah,
here.
those, what are those?
Yeah, so Councilman Nick and I discussed it, we're gonna just sort of clean up, if you will. One of this is just a line type, issue.
Okay.
The, Fruit Street has its own overlay, it's a historic
Okay.
district. This one here is actually left over where we had the Funnel Street overlay district.
Okay.
So it's sort of closing, it's sort of formality of just closing the map.
So,
But so it's, I guess.
no, so are those two pieces, R2A proposed now?
Well, in this drawing, they are shown that way. However, I think very quickly, the end result will be this will remain and become, and, stay a DECA two base,
Okay, I was
area,
confused.
yeah. It just happens to be that it's actually one of those things that kind of popped out to us as we were looking here, because we've been looking since the special overlay district was developed, and so when we took it off the map, we're all focused on a bunch of other areas. It wasn't until we started to break it down, oh, there's still these slivers left underneath that is still this. So we agree that we don't, correct. But that's the reason why those traces are there, otherwise, as you see, there's nothing else in that yellow, the D5 area.
So, I mean, so that, thank you, that answers some of my questions, and just, I said, I am generally comfortable with these areas being at 25 feet as proposed, but I do think it's worth, deferring to some more council.
Good on those questions. Just add a ward counselor who wrote in for comment, in case any from Ward 1 is listening. Counselor Z has requested that what would be the R2A portion of Ward 1 become its own sub-district, R2A-1. But I think the intention is to potentially adopt the same dimensional controls, but to be able to legislate zoning in the ward going forward if there are changes needed. I don't want words in his mouth, but that is something that we will consider in our committee meeting. Go ahead.
Is that just a convenience thing?
I think so, and I say it for Councilor Medina Smith, who may be interested in an R2A-5.
Right, because that's something Councilor Delay and I had sort of been talking about as well, like, we would not necessarily talking about all of these pieces with that, so I see.
There's something interesting about this process starting and then giving the board counselors who know best what's going on in those neighborhoods an opportunity to present their recommendation. Go ahead.
I just want to, I think based on the statutory changes, of course, part, the discussion was had in 21. And certainly as Councilor Track pointed out, it was a little bit more of a discussion and a focus on this area here, that are than perhaps some of the other areas. But I think that just sort of a basis for that, the height, adjustment there. We obviously discussed a little bit less the decuts. I saw the height with this 226 amendment. I saw that as sort of one of the sort of common themes and points of relatively consistent sort of, sentiment that we were hearing in that discussion, 221, that, a very discrete dimensional change that can be adjusted that might address some of those concerns. So I saw that sort of from this. I do share Councilor Track's concern and anyone else who, I know I've said this before, but I am a little bit concerned about us tinkering with the R2 in several different rounds, and in part, not to mention the mechanics of it and what sort of policy choices we made, but even just confusing the general public or anyone else who's involved here when we start referring to R2A, R2B, or something different. And in some cases, we've had sort of a mixture or overlapping of those, which got even further confusion. So to Councilor Track's point, which I agree with, is one way or another, I think there's an argument for some of these pieces, and we always have to decide some things because zoning is very complicated, and doing the entire dimensional table or all districts at once is, can collapse under its own weight. I do think there's, we have to parse things off sometimes, but I do agree with the notion that trying to do it as best we can comprehensively is beneficial overall, because it'll, one, create less confusion and frustration for folks, and two, provide the best, result at the end of the day, hopefully.
I really am kind of fascinated by this idea that we could take the opportunity to carve the zone, something we've been talking about, and not necessarily do anything with it, but just bring them into existence. It sounds like what maybe perhaps what Councilor Z was saying, and then they would be there for future.
Lot size adjustments.
Yes, and then it would make sense in that small piece. So I am, shall we say, intrigued by throwing that onto this when it doesn't hurt anybody and it doesn't actually change anything, but it might streamline or at least create a runway for those changes to talk about it sort of more holistically with the neighborhood in those areas. But my question actually for you, Andy, is was the was the advertisement written broadly enough to allow us to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So sorry, just to be clear here, the notice during this particular hearing was written broadly enough to recognize, especially based on the discussion we had in 221, that the council might want to or need to, in the course of usual discussion of zoning and with the planning board's input, might want to tinker with or adjust this R2 proposal, R2A, looking at the entirety of R2, whether it's the decon portion or other subdivisions of R2. So it did contemplate the possibility that, as like with any other map amendment or zoning amendment, you might need to tinker with things. So it did contemplate and assume that that's something that might come up. It did cover that ground. It's up to you, of course, the policy, what you want to include or not include. You might benefit by giving yourself the break under those areas, but by going through all that exercise, I just want to note that even if you broke it down that way, you might easily find that, well, those aren't the waivers we wanted to break it up later on. So you're still back into a discussion with Ron, where it might still be better to have the overall, idea of what you want to do as a whole before breaking down the area even further. It would be by sense. Rather than breaking it down and then finding out those are also different areas and having the other pieces, dimensional changes made from there. Just to make sure.
Thank you.
We had areas A through G, just to be clear, when we were breaking out. So depending on how many you want to break it down into and how complicated you want to make it, so it may be worthwhile trying to decide are there that many areas.
But we're exhausting questions and deliberation. Might I recommend that we entertain the motion at our committee meeting? I was helpful to get it out for discussion on the DCOD, as opposed to taking a vote on it tonight. Technically, it's still
Sorry, what do you want to do?
potentially motion and bring it back to the committee, but
The amendment.
The amendment.
For the amendment.
So when would this happen?
on the agenda next Wednesday. I think some of the feedback here gives me a sense that we might want to take a little bit more time, maybe have another hearing with the board at some point, but
I was really looking forward to this process, especially, we're not getting much to go through because, but sure, I'll withdraw.
before you do, other opinions on the timing here?
I am comfortable taking a step on this, and I would like to give it more discussion. So I do not. I don't feel the rush, and partially because Councilor Delay and I felt very much emergency pressure with 221 when we were discussing that, and that felt like an emergency in those neighborhoods. And it turned out that we were concerned about a little bit of a land rush and this and what can we do, and it did not materialize. So I would rather do it right than do it fast. Would be where I'm at. So I know that my comfort with that is a little bit different, but I am comfortable taking this back.
Okay, well, I will withdraw my motion to amend. I will bring it back. Maybe. I will say that this is actually an extremely simple zoning proposal. Extremely simple. So it's going to be hard to get it wrong. And I actually see coming up in the DCOD situation where it might be very helpful to have this.
Can I just speak as a member? I don't know if you're in deliberations, just you or, but I would say as a planning board member, I wouldn't want to close public comment on an amendment so big. Even if everyone would ultimately get there and we'd have consensus someday, I would not want to close public comment tonight.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone suggests
Okay.
closing public comment, because when we have committee meetings, the public is allowed to speak. It's a matter of, I think the discussion was having another joint planning board.
Well, I think to June's point, we would have to close the public hearing tonight, in order to then bring it back. Or we have the next council
Well, I
meeting.
think the planning board, yeah.
And
That's what you
and I
don't
would not
do.
support that.
Okay.
I'm just one member, but I wouldn't be there.
I don't disagree with it. I think we have a lot of discussion amongst ourselves relative to our.
Can I ask a follow-up? Could we hypothetically schedule another meeting as a continuation of the joint public hearing?
You mean, is there, looking at the city calendar, is a specific day meeting other than the next planning board meeting?
Right. If we met as a committee next Wednesday and or could we come to the 19th, I suppose, would be the next available meeting to.
Yeah, so Bob and the other members meeting right now, we could grab just the 5 Parker Street application, which needs a little more time to commit conservation commission probably. But so that's up to you. Like we can take it that first thing that works.
So we have to move pretty quick. If we feel like.
And I'll also say that this isn't side request, this is a main event, the height, the decap, and all those other things. And we have this working guidelines that we're just handed out, and we just handed it out, but it says what we're talking about. Now we just have to get it right in our mind, get it all comfortable, why we make the decision. So we're not gonna be lagging, I don't think. I don't believe it.
We're done on 226 for tonight. So we need to motion to continue joint public hearing on 226 to August 19th. Say aye.
I,
Same motion.
Same for the planning board, continue. 226. Ordinance.
August 19th.
Roll call again. Brian?
Yes.
Paul Clark?
Yes.
Amy Pennington?
Yes.
Rick Painter?
He dropped that.
Matt Huffman?
Yes.
I'm a yes.
And motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye. Thank you all.
Your
Thank you.
next thing, to your next.
It just reflects as we sit here that, the state said that 351 cities and towns, here it is. So I can imagine the amount of work in each
We have,
planning board, city council, town meeting.
we were the only people.
That's fair.
Well, I guess, confidence, I guess.
Everybody else is zoning.
No. It just hasn't hit yet.
Yeah, they just have.
There's a lot out
they
there.
have to
Lots of planners.
what happens on the original doesn't affect cost.
Oh.
Other on the-
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm saying,
Oh, the other- That-
4 years ago.
yeah. They-
You want to go to the.
So.
Because they move.
What the-
So all of them.
Right, did you want to go to the other agency?
Oh, yeah. We still have approval of minutes of 15th of July. Highly comment. Has anyone else had comments? on anything?
Good.
So if you're all set with your review, then I think if we could have a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Motion to approve the July 15th meeting minutes.
Move on. All those in favor? Any thumbs are approved. Next item is the planning board recommendation relative to.
There's a typo there, it's 221, which is,
One.
right, the one we.
And you all have a copy, hard copy of the draft, and I will say, based upon tonight's discussion, there's a lot of work to do on this, but let me give you a couple of, just kind of baseline assumptions relative to this and what I used to put it together. So number one, I made reference to the representative neighborhood study 2019, and the fundamental issue that recommendation that came out of that study for me was that the R2 district be subdivided into two separate districts. And I'm not going to get into what they should be called. So two separate sub-districts. And recognizing that in each of those separate districts, there are different development patterns, different densities, different lot sizes. So it warrants a look at zoning dimensional requirements that may vary from sub-district to sub-district. So that was the starting point. I will say that I assumed in this, and I don't think this is really where this should end up. I assumed in this that the only thing we would be talking about relative to the R2A district is the height limitation. So I did not address anything else in here relative to lot size, and I think we probably should. So I'd like to keep talking about that and flesh this out a little bit more.
In the discussion, in the discussion tonight, and with the assumption that the final planning board report would come out of the following meeting, bit more by different discussions.
So, I guess just to go through this, we've established that sub-districts are recommended. Based upon what we were describing here, one sub-district is called R2A. That's everything that is outside of the demolition control overlay district. The other sub-district is called R2 DCOD. That's everything that is currently within the DCOD. So as this document suggests, those are the two sub-districts that we're. In terms of, back to the report again, the representative neighborhood study. In the R2A district, lot sizes are larger. Setbacks are greater dimension, and so this document suggests that we don't change the 10,000 square foot lot size. We don't change the 25-foot front yard setback. I think that's on the table for discussion tonight. What I did want to emphasize is that, again, the study that was done looked at representative neighborhoods within the DCOD, and the average lot size in those neighborhoods. We talked about this at the last meeting. It's closer to 5,000 square feet. So reducing the lot size requirement, 10,000 square feet, 5,000 feet would be logical development pattern. That would allow a couple of things, a very limited number of lots where those lots are greater than 10,000 square feet, where there might be a house on a lot with substantial land adjacent to it. This would at least provide the opportunity for those lots to be subdivided by lots, and they would be buildable. The state law creates a lot of change relative to this. And if we were to, before the state law, if we were to reduce the lot size to 5,000 square feet, we would have many more conforming lots within the DC. What the state law has done is said that there may not be any advantage to that if you have a non-conforming, you can still make changes without. So there's less of an advantage from that point of view to reduce to 5,000. But there was some other comment earlier this evening about making the zoning dimensional requirements consistent with the neighborhood. The average lot size in the DPOD is around 5,000 square feet. There may be a lot more discussion. In terms of frontage, again, in the R2A district, frontage is really going to depend on what we define relative to lots. Lot size stays at 10,000 square feet, and there's a logic to be for frontage. But if there's a desire to change that, then I would recommend frontage. In the DCOD, the average frontage dimension is 49 to 61 feet for the study that was done. So we would recommend reduction in the frontage from 90 feet to 50. So you have a 5,000 square foot lot, feet of frontage gives you 100 feet of depth. And I think that works out with setbacks to be roughly at 1,800 buildable footprint. That gets you to roughly 30. Same thing relative to the 2A district. Again, depending on that lot size determination, frontage determination, currently there's a 25. May or may not be where, I think it's fairly typical for those neighborhoods. Maybe that doesn't change, but that's something we could look at in the context of those other two dimensional requirements. In the DCOD, average lot front yard setback is 5 to 7 feet. Brian's house is less than that. My house is even less than his. So if we had a reduction in the DCOD to 5 feet, that would be consistent with the development patterns of the neighborhood. It does raise the issue of if you've got a house in those neighborhoods that have greater setback. This would technically, it would allow you to extend the front of your house closer to the street, which I don't think is a great idea. And I think there needs to be language here that protects against that and at least allows for review of a proposal to extend the front of a house based upon the reduction in the front yard setback. I mentioned lot coverage and, you know, the 50-foot frontage, 5,000 square foot, overall lot dimension. That coverage in the DCOD then ends up being 35%, 25%. Again, is up for discussion based upon how large the lot size is. I can do a diagram for all of you relative to building height. I completely understand and agree with the reduction in R2A from 35 feet to 25 feet. I'll do a quick summary of the math that got me to 27.5 feet. If you assume a ground floor ceiling height of, first of all, a lot of the houses in the decon area are two full stories before you get to the roof. So if the ground floor ceiling height is 9 feet, the floor to floor height is 10 feet. If the second floor ceiling height is 8 feet, 19 feet of height for those two occupied floors. If you assume, based upon various site conditions, that the ground floor is, for assumption, 3 feet above grade, now you're at 22 feet of height, which leaves you 5.5 feet of roof to play with to the midpoint of the sloping roof. Most roofs in the decon district are probably 8/12 or 10/12 roof slope. So a 25-foot wide house is going to get you about 4 to 5 feet of roof height. Just above term. So that's how I got to 27. But I think there needs to be a diagram or examples that illustrate it. But that's the math.
Can I just say on the record, I don't think that would allow federal staff. Not that people are building these things, but that is an important factual thing I think to know. Owen, would you agree? I mean, in your analysis.
There's a federal style house on Beck Street next to our house that probably is within much grander federal style houses, maybe not. But
Right, when first floors.
we would have to, yeah. In terms of FAR, I'm not sure where you all are on FAR yet. I think if we do talk about it, it needs to be a sliding scale. And we need a higher FAR. And I just wanted to add in here that I think we should encourage multi-unit development where we can, with some of the larger sites that are available, as long as we can get to a net site area. So 10,000 square foot site makes sense for 3 units. Look at the examples that I showed. So here, those are all. That was the starting point. The document I was interested in. Any thoughts or comments?
I just had a question. Generally speaking, so much of this makes a lot of sense. And it's a great conversation starter, but it does seem very focused on within the DCOD. And Amendment 221 was focused entirely outside. So I await your feedback on the outside of the area decon.
We acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Like I said at the beginning, this assumed that we were only talking about. It wasn't.
Oh, I see, that
You know,
it kind of got confused.
I
Okay.
think there's a lot more to talk about, and I would, well,
I mean, I think that, I'll just, my sort of observation here is that, and it is absolutely a worthwhile exercise, as we all know, to get the facts in the ordinance to match the facts on the ground. But I will say that Councilor Delay and I are also interested in how to make our zoning in especially that swath, from Mosley Woods to the hospital, that rough swath, more progressive to get, to encourage that housing and to do those carrots and sticks that Jamie was talking about. So I would encourage, as you're thinking about it, to sort of think about your feedback, not just in describing what's already there, but in thinking about, can we proactively shrink these lot sizes to encourage a little bit of that density and to make, the things that we were discussing. Because I think we were interested in, trying to find creative ways to allow two-family homes that would still fit in the neighborhood, but, that is going to require small lots. And then but making it by right is what might help us get it done, because that's the carrot. So that's just some thoughts that I had on my head.
Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate this, and also the context, because I can see when I saw that first sentence under lot size, you just sucked right out of my scale.
yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I should have said, well, it should be deferred for later.
Yeah, no, so I appreciate that context. I mean, to Councilor Chalk's point, I think, obviously, Ward 4 Councilor, Ward 6 Councilor, we're interested in that.
So
Yeah, but those areas that that really emerged as areas of concern were in that area, so we really didn't focus on, R2D cod as an area of concern, and legitimately, maybe there's a council who take that up and make some of these changes. We agree with you from our analysis. We see that there's benefits of doing this as well from a conformity. And you mentioned something about there's less of an advantage to reducing 10,000 square foot, but I think there is an advantage to do so when you bring them into conformity. Now you don't have to deal with the state's.
Conforming, then
Exactly. And the controls with forming now. Controls.
I suspect that in the R2 outside of the DCOT, lot size is a major piece of creating conformity. We don't have as many varieties of non-conformities as we do within the DCOT. So I think that it would be more effective there than it would be in the DCOT.
And I think one of the things that certainly surprised me a little bit, but maybe not. I mean, I think a lot of people assume that out there in the the majority of our lot sizes are 10,000 and larger, and in fact, about half of them, and that's more of a 6 thing. Certainly, I'm very much more for 6, but only about half. And I think what we learned is that do reduce that lot size to 5,000 square feet, at least for the R2 areas in Ward 4 and in Ward 5 and Ward 6, it reduced the number of non-conformities to single-digit numbers, which was amazing. Ward 4, I think maybe it gets down to 13%. Still,
At least on that size. I mean, we don't know about.
Yes. Jennifer, but it's usually my ear saying that's just what. But I think that was a way to help us.
so what was that mean?
We would have to, I mean, that's
Yeah,
something.
you tell us.
We obviously agree and have to reduce that as well. And in my mind, I have like features that is. That's 49 is good, but I don't have any evidentiary basis for pulling out that. I would defer maybe.
I mean, to be very honest, when we first started, you all were very focused. can talk about. So that is still kind of in this text here, but we've got to get both. I'm less familiar with issues, particular issues.
Sure.
Other than, generally understanding that lot sizes tend to be a little bit bigger. But I think there's a lot. I need that.
And I will say that we're all kind of victim of our experience, right? So in our case, we have a list of things that we see, and then Andy has a long list, Jennifer has a list of things we'd like to see changed in the ordinance. And then, 221 came as a, hey, look at this. So we said, okay, we'll look at that. And then that begets questions about, well, what about this? What about that? We did 1800, was very popular here, set of meetings. And it was the classic clash of people with large homes on very small lots, looking at a developer who was constrained by 10,000 square feet, and we were constrained by ports and lanes, and we were debating about almost helplessly, why are we here? So I think it made it easier for R2A to say, yeah, that makes sense. The height makes sense, all those things. So they came up with real life, but we had no way to set that. So we didn't step by it to work. We just said, we agree with that work in some sense. And then what we also realized is at the time, we should push for what we see. Because we are the planning board, right? We don't have the political dilemma, but we still have tools that we would love to have. And that's where the energy went. So it was both and not.
And I do know that Councilor Harmon has a running list of sort of like the parking lot of that he wanted to create a communication about. And maybe that's something where it's like all these other ideas that came up in the workshops that perhaps we cannot, Councilor Nikich's point, it's real hard to address all of it at once. And he said it collapses under its own weight, but there is a list of other things. And so perhaps, I don't know if you're thinking about, when you're thinking about making these recommendations, maybe it's, if you're making all of the recommendations of everything you see in both of those, R2A and R2D cod, and then knowing that we are taking up a slice of that and that the remainder is on the record then for the future. I mean, if that feels, but I understand totally that you were thinking about it also.
I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts. I think these are the headings, just generally, that I think need to be addressed in both. So I would say one thing relative. Yes, you. But it wouldn't hurt to be addressed in this broader discussion, because when you're a limited number in a ports and lanes scenario, the lots get bigger.
Yep.
So I think, the projects that we have looked at, to me, all would have been much more interesting if there were smaller. I think, I don't know if we'll get to that in this discussion right now, but I think that is something that should be discussed.
Question, is what you're saying, I think right now, there's a limit to how many structures you can put, you're saying increase the number of structures.
I think we should look, because that, if we have smaller lot size,
And if we shrink the lot sizes, then that would automatically affect it?
Yeah, because there's a yield calculation, right? And there's the floor.
There's also absolute cap. So if you're moving the cap or changing the cap like 6 units, right? That's right, yeah.
The only thing to caution you on, and I don't have a solution or even a strong opinion on it, but we also have the open space, the OSRD. So if you get those too close together, there might be some conflicts. You might start encouraging one or the other the way you didn't intend. I don't know, but I have not been here for permitting on OSRD. I've only been here to deal with like the fallout later and the complexity because they're very difficult, I think, for the future homeowners to manage because they have to abide by
Uh-huh.
all the requirements from years ago.
Yeah.
But, so I think people would start to go towards splits. I think, and this could be a good thing, I just don't know enough about it yet, but to encourage more towards lanes instead of that, or in an alternative way to that or something.
The Corden, if I may, the Corden Lane is limited to number because it's on a reduced size street. It's effectively a shared driveway.
Right, it's
So
not,
that's why the limit on the number, really,
yes,
if you were, as part of this conversation, to reduce the lot size requirement and the frontage, there would have been room for a traditional scale street. So we're not talking Horton Lane anymore, we're just talking a regular dead-end street that has all the amenities of a regular street, but because we allow smaller lots and smaller frontages, all of a sudden you can fit 6 smaller homes there as opposed to 4 bigger. So I think really this comes back to the conversation of what is the right size parcel in the neighborhood. And then some of this other stuff goes away. It's just, that's the path I had to send them because of the number of lots that they could fit at the 10,000 square foot requirement. And they had to be as big as they were to get the right frontage.
although please forgive me because this is a can of worms, but like to show just how everything is related, right? Part of it is suburban standard size streets are too wide.
Yep.
Like just to show you how interconnected all is, and I'm sure you know this, right? But that one hits me. Like I would rather have more narrow courts and lanes on some of these bigger lots. I think that'd be a great cluster development type to have, but we don't really
More
have a way to encourage it.
And even in that, the one we just did, I suggested a sidewalk. And, oh, we can't do a sidewalk.
Not enough.
Everyone will get along on the street. So I said, what about someone who's 95 years old?
Like what?
And it's a snowplow. No, can't do it. Like, this is like inventing something new. And there was.
Like on one of the plans.
And it disappeared. Right, so if the roadway is smaller than the drive. Exactly. You're right, they all are related, and that's why we have to put a piece of paper like this together, and appreciate Bob, payment it would be just to a piece, because something else. It's not intended consequences,
It's funny you say about the width of streets though. Some streets are abnormally wide for the residential character of the neighborhood, including the one that I live on. I can fit 4 cars across. I've seen it actually. It's the 25.
It's the offset to Lime Street.
Well, lower.
Lower.
I just wanted to offer a suggestion. I know I'm gonna sound like a record on this, as we go through all these discussions with zoning, but it may be beneficial as well with the planning board report, even though there are several other maps now that have been created in some of these amendments, the discussions today. It may be beneficial to essentially attach to this report, for instance, when we're referring to R2A, to attach this R2A map that we're all referring to. So, and particularly in the council that haven't been involved in the discussion or haven't already looked at in great detail, the maps, everybody can make sure they understand, when they're looking at the whole report. Hopefully, as we go forward again, we will all just be talking about the same areas and the same nomenclature, so that there's no confusion in one or the other. So it helps because we have a graphic to show with some of these, and there's a variety of different ones we can modify. So, same thing to some degree with if the planning board report here, we're referencing from the sponsors concluding presentation, the R2B, concept of areas A through C or D, up on that map, it may be beneficial if this was done. Or we would have that if this is what we're referring to, and what we understood might be coming back as well. Something. Whatever the other, that's what all the other councils. There's the planning amendments. Because again, these are also separate, right? 221 is one report, that 226 is another.
Very specific, I'm just gonna make the request, right? I think specifically for us moving forward on that 221 focused area that we were talking about, Mosley Woods through the hospital. If you are able to give some deep consideration to lot size there and to how frontage would be affected by that, and further to floor area ratio on the sliding scale. We are very much open to what is the right floor area ratio and what are the right breakdowns? Are we talking 5,000 and less and then 5,000 to 10, or are we breaking it into a finer? So if you really like want to nerd out on it for us, that I think be a really helpful place for us to start to have some numbers in the recommendation based on, sort of what you know about those areas and what you know about it's going to make a good neighborhood. That it, and it gives us a starting point. It gives us, frankly, something to show people and explain. So like you were saying, you're like, how do we justify or verify the number? That would be really helpful for us if that could be part of your work.
I'm wondering, and I regret that I couldn't attend the workshops. They always come into my schedule, but it sounds like it was great work. But was there ever any study of how, when you bring lots into conformity, right? Both size and frontage, which we have to think about, but size probably captures a lot of it, right? Do then, contrary to the statute, which makes us only have to deal with setback and height, now you can make them conform to lot coverage and open space, right? So has there been a study done to show what that just by shrinking the lots naturally creates for FAR? Because it naturally creates a sliding scale, and I don't know if it's enough, or if
Yeah.
it gets you part of the way.
It kind of came up just organically in discussion of the fact that like you shrink the lots, but you still have those setbacks, that buildable envelope just gets smaller, but we don't have like math on it, so.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like an algebraic equation, right? I can imagine that you could set the sliding scale
Yeah.
somehow in relation.
In relationship to what you could do with, I hear what you're saying.
I don't know if it would solve the problem or not, but if you're just trying to think of a sliding scale with no
Yeah,
anchor or foothold on how to do it, that might be a starting.
yeah, and it would certainly give you, it would give you the starting point of like, well, this is the FAR that you would get at least in that like buildable envelope, but then you want it, starting point.
Especially now that you're, decreasing height.
Yeah,
too, right?
yeah.
So-
Because you wouldn't want to drop like 1% or 2% and then exclude a whole bunch. I know what you're saying. What's the
Did it
natural
today.
one?
So a lot, 6,000 square foot lot.
Yeah.
Which is roughly 70 by 70, I think.
Okay.
Once you take the setback boxes out, as they exist, 25-foot front, 25-foot back, 10-foot on the sides, that leaves you with a footprint of 1288 to play with. That includes a garage and everything else.
And
When you bring the 25-foot height in, all of a sudden you have a very reasonably sized house. Done. FAR goes away by right sizing the lot. I mean, to a point, this is a very gross level, but and maybe it's worth a diagram, but I mean, that's.
no, that makes sense, but that's only if you then subdivide the lot. If you keep your 10,000 square foot lot and then start building all the way out, that I think is where FAR still matters because.
It might.
Yeah.
But on the smaller lot, it addresses the issue. The larger lot,
If you keep setbacks. What we were talking about a few weeks ago is, keeping lot sizes at 10,000 square feet and then limiting the size of a house through needs. Be a small house on a market. FAR makes sense if you want to prevent a really large house being built on it.
That was always my way to start here.
And to me, FAR becomes. You've got the dimensional setback, you've got a height limitation, and you've got buildable footprint, which is much more.
So perhaps then, FAR only applies to lots that are 500 square feet or above, and then that's a sliding scale or something like that, but
Yeah.
some, or 10,000 and above, and it's like, well, now you have to pay attention to this, but, and then they be conform it, okay.
it can't apply to them. If it's a small lot, if it's less than our conforming lot, FAR can't be applied. The state has said.
Right,
No, I'm just saying, so
yeah, but if we shrink the lot size, then yes, it could.
Right.
you'd have to shrink it pretty small in that district to make.
Yeah, but But yeah,
I think
that's,
you're-
we're saying the same
You know,
thing.
it's the 80-20 rule though, if 80% of it is covered, it
Yeah.
is accurate. The other, there's always gonna be outliers.
Right.
For every, especially here, you know, there's so many unique, but there's so many different lot sizes, house sizes, styles.
I just have a question. I didn't realize it's not going to focus the discussion tonight, because the two-family element was raised in the discussion in 221, but it wasn't part of the original Spark version. It was sort of evolved during the discussion. I'm just wondering, to the extent the planning board is speaking to that piece of it, in addition to the dimensional elements of 221, any thoughts on the two-family option as well? Just so that that's not this. Again, just wanted to throw that out.
Recognizing that there's a state economic development and conference committee that will allow.
They may enter that form. To the extent of
Tend to be Murphy's Law and all this stuff. So apologies. Gotta work on something new.
We come up with different rules tomorrow, but, you know, I just mentioned that only because it was in terms of the scope of the range of discussion, you know, if you're trying to cover, again, this is also a question for everybody here, you know, how much ground and how much detail you're covering, what's appropriate to parse off, what needs further discussion, you know, how you
I believe if the two-family was enacted, right, the use is allowed by right, but we'd still have dimensional controls if we make lots conforming.
Yes.
That's my understanding.
That's generally
Yeah.
the state issue.
One of the things in it is not limited less than 3 stories. Which, although I wish Nina had been here, right? Because my question is like, does it, well, we can still say 25 feet, you know, technically you could get 3 stories in there.
Yeah, that,
I'm very
there
curious.
are gonna be some pieces, you know, until we get to the finish line, right?
Yeah.
We know definitively, and some of those things may have little idiosyncrasies or attachments or caveats to them. Yeah. But generally speaking, they're, for the most part, they're still relatively distinct issues.
Does everyone like an answer, Bruce? I see.
That's right. You're gonna see all the
Dormer.
There's also a legislative proposal to reduce lot size to 5,000.
Yeah.
Yes.
These of us could be in the Newburyport area.
Yeah.
That's the representative. All these things.
And one of the things that, just as a reminder also, and thank you, Andy, for bringing up the two-family, that we had talked about was, you know, a separate floor area ratio scale for a two-family home, right? So within the setbacks and with all that, but allowing greater floor area ratio to encourage that and to allow a two-family versus like, fine, if you're only gonna build one house, it's gonna be smaller. But, and again, carrot stick there. So considering that and, you know, your thought.
Development standpoint, if you can build more saleable square foot
Yes.
for a multi-unit scenario.
Was the alternative pathway to profitability.
I think that's an important component, by the way, that the floor area ratio, as you all remember, and talking about senior on this, but I think that what we heard through the workshop process ratio is far more acceptable to the builder community generally if we drop the lot size to 5,000 and have a sliding scale of lots. These things all interact with one another in a way that we're trying to obviously make this something that we get behind. And so it's not just about creating more conforming properties, which is now even more important. The state that changed to 48, but also mention this alternative pathway to profitability, protecting values. Appreciate your consideration of that.
So, given that, you know, Bob's taking the time to draft up a report and there's 2 weeks between now and the next meeting, I know we don't have every other member here tonight, of course, but any other additional feedback that you could give Bob and Brian knows, look at this, try to circle back to the next meeting. Based on what we have, you know, in the draft and what we have that's been discussed tonight, if there's anything else that you can offer so that, you know, there's time for any weeks to just come back to you 2 weeks from now. So I know we don't have to break it.
So I guess the question I have, you said that is the work, it just did on lot size and it could be the height component. So I think the height component is gonna come up as an amendment, right? But there's some different new examples, we have those examples.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Meaning including.
When
some-
you did the analysis of, 90 federal and all those ones.
Yeah.
And what we were looking at is lot size, right? I think that was what, and how it fit within the neighborhood. But if we just did the same math on height, 27 and a half, that's the magic number we're working with, we could see what impact that would have.
Or which geographic areas we're referring to?
For the decon.
For the entire decon.
Yeah, because that was the amendment that was on the table, right? So we'll have to have that math done.
Well, however, that was on a go-forward basis for 226 going forward tonight in the hearing, but not necessarily in the original.
Correct.
So it's a question here of what you're commenting on in 224.
Correct.
Yeah, so I had mentioned including we have the benefit of the R2A map, so attaching that map from the 226 is actually beneficial to this 221 report, but it does get a little confusing when we start.
It's very
The recommendation to 21, we are recommending a reduction.
right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so you're saying get the data to go with that.
But the same data, we don't want to create a new.
Could I, yeah, I'm sorry, go.
There was a statement that was made that I guess I would like you as sponsors to clarify. I think it speaks to the confusion that's happening now. When 221 was brought forward, it was for all of the R2. That is my recollection.
At the very beginning,
Yes.
we have since.
I know, but that is where the planning board began, is that these changes were for all of the R2. And so Bob's report is recommending immediately a subdivision, consistent with where you all arrived very, very early on. I mean, just to be clear. And so their report would be appropriate to make these sort of recommendations to all of the R2. It's not
Yeah,
incorrect.
they can recognize that the committee and the discussion landed with perhaps peeling off to give
Two
some but it does deal with the entirety of our.
Yeah, so I guess I just want to, where you're wondering about making recommendations to the DCOD, that is consistent with your original 221 that went to the planning board. Although your focus,
We are more than happy
okay,
to
yeah,
take
I just
all
wanted,
recommendations that anybody wants to make from a holistic point of view. We are also asking very much for specific feedback for R2A outside.
Right.
Just to clarify.
yes.
Could I ask a question that might help a little bit,
Yeah.
help me anyway, but maybe it helps you, hopefully it will. So first of all, kudos, because in R2A, it sounds like you've achieved like the almost unattainable, which is consensus, which is amazing. And
Don't jinx it, Chief.
as close as I've seen it, and I was on the zoning board for 10 years, as close as I've seen it, it's incredible, kudos. And you're close to getting on the decon. I think where I got nervous tonight, and with due respect to Councilor Nikitic, is that I was hearing that these same things could be applied. It's a great model for the decon, but you're just not there yet on the decon. And some reduction in height is warranted. Some of these same changes are warranted, but you're just not there because the focus was not on it. And I would love to see, and I'm not speaking out both sides of my mouth on this because I think some piecemeal is good. Like get R2A tight, not piecemeal, within R2A. And then piecemeal, we can do R2 decon, and it's a great model for how to do R2 decon.
That's what we were
Same
hoping for
process.
ultimately, that the workshop process would serve as a model for other areas while we are hyper-focused on exactly what you said, buttoning up the area that we wanted to do. And then there's a model, and because that included potential design standards on 2 families, and that can be a model for other, so yes, we're very much in agreement with that approach and that sort of concept. And
Sorry, with the understanding that given the state's actions now,
Mhm.
the economic district is vulnerable to.
Yes, but that I think still would remain, I mean, that is on the table with 226, that is not on the table, the DCOT is not part of 221 beta, right? You know, part B or whatever, like, that's not our focus. I just want to be very upfront with that we are not expanding the work that we did on 221 into the DCOT in the same, in a forthcoming bill omnibus. That's not our approach. Because as Jamie said, you're so close on R2A being tight. And then, you know, we are not planning to sponsor a similar thing for the DCOT, but you do have something on the table before you in 226. That's what, that's,
We will still.
Yeah.
yeah, do all the things, that's fine.
We're not gonna second let you off.
To either say, oh,
Yes,
and
yes, so
and we still think it's important enough to keep
of
working on
course.
it.
Yeah, yes, and I just wanted to be upfront that please don't be sad when we say, thank you so much. We're gonna do this. And it's not to say we wouldn't do it in the future, well, probably is to say that Council July wouldn't do it in the future, since she does not have any DCOT, but it's not to say that no one will take it up, but it's that we will not take it up in an actionable way immediately. But of course, yes, it should all be discussed at the same time and make all the recommendations. I just don't want to write a check I can't cash on passing something DCOT.
I just want to say that if you're uncertain about who might take up the econ side of this, you might think about dealing with it. I think that there's such a disparity between current zoning and development that it really needs to be looked at.
Totally agree.
But if there's uncertainty about who might carry that initiative forward, you might think about doing it so that we can at least get these issues. I would be very worried that it's just.
I understand the concern is what we talked about, you know, when we were like, oh, we just do height. Is there still going to be the appetite to do the rest of it? So I absolutely understand that concern and the need to think of it holistically. We will take that under advisement. We are but two mere mortals, day jobs. So, but yeah, I understand.
So you said something earlier.
I know. Be all of it.
I do though, you know, I do remain concerned, I'm glad to see the land it's easier, but I do remain concerned, especially now with this change. Walk around my neighborhoods, thinking, what's going next, you know, that person just went to assisted living, that house is next, so, you know, there's fast and right, but we do a little bit.
Right, we're different.
Line Street right now has I think there's at least 4 houses.
Yeah.
That are under substantial construction. And I don't think there's anything that happening.
Any additional feedback we can give Bob, or have we given everything? We'll come back to the next meeting, we'll.
Next item then is changes to chapter.
What? We say probably relevant one here. There are some other changes. There's one that deals with variances that's more so applicable to the ZBA. We did touch a little bit on the expansion piece of this, the sort of as of right expansion piece of it tonight. I think, we can elaborate on that, but I wanted to, in the next couple of days, we'll be pushing out from our office, some update, basically sort of a encapsulation of what's happening there. But something most notable and sort of take down to us are the variance procedure, which really is for the ZBA for the most part. they're dealing with. And then here, as we talk about the spatial allowances and what people can do as of right for expansions, and the reduction in a lot of cases of the controls to just the setbacks. That's probably the biggest, most salient, piece for you to, have in mind. As we're talking about. We'll have more discussion about that. I wasn't necessarily thinking we should unpack more of that tonight so much as I think that is probably the most relevant piece. And Jennifer could be other thoughts.
What concerns me in the decon with the reduction to 5,000 square feet is that you still will have a large number of properties that are not because of setback.
Setbacks are fine. You can be non-conforming for setbacks and still have to go for discretionary review.
Coverage is a good one though.
But lot coverage, so your recommendation to go to 35% there to try and make things more conforming, I think is a good one.
Mhm.
Every day this week, I have approved an accessory structure in the DCOD that I wouldn't have approved last month
Interesting.
Because of coverage.
because of lot coverage. Would have had to go for discretionary review,
Right.
but you can put it in now. That ADU that you couldn't put in your backyard, and I'm not saying ADUs are bad, but they would have had to go before the board for discretionary review, and the neighbors would, the neighborhood would have known about it.
Yeah.
Lot coverage is a huge deal.
Mhm.
So, and the DCOD's where people are gonna want to put the ADUs.
Yeah.
And they don't need parking because they're within half mile of the train.
So when we talk about the potential to build out going to the setbacks and the height, that's the potential on a lot of these scenarios. The worst case scenario, especially we have to think about is out of the envelope of those two things.
Yeah. So I'm not in favor of reducing setbacks within the DCOD. Because I think that's a control that you might want to consider maintaining.
I would certainly be more sensitive to that one in general. I can see the pros and cons just as well as mentioning, but like Jennifer, I think it's certainly a much more sensitive area because of how tight, how much people can do essentially as a right to go review.
And I'm all for, I mean, I am not against development and all of that. I know how sensitive the DCOD is.
Well, and one thing I want to talk about the lot size side of it, and I definitely see the parallel here, as well, the rationale as well as mentioning, and I see the relevance for the Highland Ave application you reviewed recently. But I also think there tends to be difficulty when you even though we're trying to right size, right, and fix this, arbitrarily applied zoning, standards are being adopted across the country. We're trying to right size and fix that, and the reality is a lot of the structures, a lot of the theories we're talking about here in the DCOD are things that can't be altered for a variety of other reasons, being they can't be torn down, right? So there's not a lot of spaces for folks to fit those things in as a real practical matter. There might be, as Bob mentioned, a few opportunities, but it will not be a huge wholesale. It's going to be very small scale overall because there's already so many structures filling out those lots to a degree that the ability to take that stuff down and reconfigure lots to get to these probably won't pan out that way. But in other neighborhoods, there might be more opportunity to do that. So it seems, inversely from that character perspective for sure, but the potential to actually do that in reality is probably going to be much diminished by all these other, types of provisions that are going to prevent that in the DCOD.
It's an exciting time to be in land use. The legislature's just going gangbusters. Great.
Well, sometimes increases at that level is more detrimental because it's 351 communities, right? Except for Boston, it's big, right? It's 350.
But we're lucky we have counselors. I gotta believe it's hard for towns. We have city councilors who are jumping on this, who wanna work with it, massage it. I can't even imagine towns. But it's like,
Yeah. Having been on thing where it's not so much cumbersome because it's got to go to town meeting and to get, when I lived in Natick, to get 120 people to pay attention to anything you say, even if your hair was on fire, they'd be like, no, it's fine the way it is. And then when it happens, then they're in an uproar. When did that happen? Well, we were here 3 years ago. We said this, now it's happening, and you can't undo it, right? You know, so it's hard. It's hard.
Should count our blessings.
So Jennifer, is it safe to say that if we left the lot size alone in the decon, left it at 10,000, 90% of the lot in the decon, non-conforming,
85, that's my count.
further,
85 by lot size. But that's gonna go up. I don't know. if-
That doesn't even include frontage.
Right, so it is only gonna go up from there. Yeah, it could be over.
for the state's action, then all of those lots would be modified.
You can build to the setback line and cover everything on that lot up to the setback line. And in most cases, you can do that without violating DCOT because you're only adding to the rear wall of the structure to do that.
But all could happen without a review,
Yeah.
without others.
Just building permits.
So the advantage of reducing the lot size is
And coverage and increasing lot coverage. I mean, that's the problem in the DCOT is that you have so many non-conformities.
awesome.
And
It is, it's a circular lot, you know, you can't just keep going around the same circle. When it is, they end up right in the same place.
Okay, any other updates from the chair? Or the planning director?
No, thank you.
Here's
Oh, yeah.
I did push out to the planning board and the city council just to do presentation, you know, and the slides and whatnot, figured. I don't think the planning development committee, the city council has the bandwidth right now because of course they're discussing zoning and they have a bunch of other things in the document that have nothing to do with zoning, it depends, but I think certainly as we go forward with this, we're gonna want to dig in a little bit further from where we're. So it's, and I think that our next meeting, maybe the tail end, we can talk. To talk a little bit more about the zoning end of it, so. You know, even working as sort of a schematic, sort of master plan or idea of what we want to have in the future, then how does that actually work in terms of permitting and so forth? So I just wanted to walk through that a little bit further. I know, Rick, we don't unfortunately have with us tonight, but, you know, we've talked a bit more about details about some of those things as well, but, you know, the as of right versus special permit, you know, which sort of standards we want in there. It's also worth mentioning because some of it will come up anyway, separately on its own, just looking at our site plan review standards and what criteria we look at in there. Again, thinking again, not just for the Story Avenue, Low Street, but just in general, what you would like to have as criteria, what you'd like to see, you know, in that. Please, you know, be brainstorming, thinking about those things so we can, you know, sort of points.
we're gonna have to do that anyway.
Yeah, that's why I say so because we have for Story Avenue, but also because of the state changes, we need to discuss our design review standards essentially. So please be thinking about those things, look at the ordinance, that's like point of view section there. And also just thinking about our Story Avenue, Low Street area, you know, any particular, you know, as we were talking about, for instance, about what are the sort of roadway, driveway, you know, with standards, you know, is there tree pits and sidewalks and whatnot, are we allowed, you know, a little bit more additional height to incentivize the housing development, to incentivize public space being created out of parking lots. We might need to incentivize some of that transition. So we'll circle back on that, but if you could at least, for those of you who have, you know, reviewed the recording of the meeting, hopefully to the extent it came out relatively decent, I think, with yeah, I think. And then looking at the slides themselves, at least, we can kind of talk.
The only other comment is when we talked about the data center proposal, I'm actually gonna be on that team. Oh, yes, I think I volunteered for it last time. Talk about water tools and all that, so I'll appreciate any other input you need other than Andy, let me know and I'll represent us.
Thanks for doing this, because you have more some expertise on here.
Well, I find funny that in Texas, which was the ones that were going great guns and allowing a million square feet and all that, the government just said, wait a minute, we don't have the electrical infrastructure. So now we just put them all on pause. It's like, no kidding. So it sounds good until you start figuring it out. So I think we'll be.
Thank you for.
Sure.
Okay, if there's nothing else. Ask for a motion to
Move to adjourn?
adjourn.